Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. Rick Hall, he is the former head coach of Hackney Aquatic Club in London, former assistant coach at Hamilton Aquatics in Dubai. Rick, how are you this afternoon?
Hey, Chris. Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Very good.
We
Juggling nights with a baby at the moment.
How old?
He is just over one, but
Oh,
he's not enjoying sleeping through the night yet.
yeah. I checked text with a friend of mine recently because I've got a 7-year-old and now an almost 3-year-old, and he's got a kid. You know, I feel like 1-year-old, like you've just kind of made it out of the woods in a lot of respects, but it's still really, really hard. I think just wait till 3. I think 3 is the top age for little kids, seriously, because you can reason with them, right? Like my 2-year-old still can't quite understand like X happens and then Y. Like he's still like, yeah. But I want X. I want it. Like, you know, but he's getting there where you can sort of reason with them, but they're not smart enough to trick you yet. So 3 years old you just got a couple years to go and you'll get there.
got a little bit. Hats off to any coaches that have more than one kid and have to do all the early mornings and late evenings. Hats off to them.
Yeah, it's really hard to balance that. I agree with you 100%. I found myself I had my first when I was head coach of a club, and I got really challenged because late nights and early mornings are kind of the most important parts of that early. That's where like the real work gets done. And all right, but let's back up a little bit. You know, for people listening to this podcast, one of the things I like to do is I like to talk to people all across the world, and you know, sort of hear the story of people that have been in various areas and therefore, you know, like sort of find the stuff all swim coaches have in common. So give people a little bit of background, starting with your own swimming career. You know, give us the sort of 2-minute version of Rick Hall, the swimmer, and then we'll get into a little bit talking about how you became a coach.
Yeah, sure. So I think like most coaches, I was swimming till I was 19 at a club called Gallica, which was a performance squad in the north of England. And I actually only joined quite late. I only actually joined that program at 15. And before that, I was a swimming club called Preston. And at the time, all the clubs sort of merged together or came together to create a performance group, which was quite new in the north of England. There hadn't been one in that area before. So I went into that. I was there for around about 4 or 5 years with some really good coaches, a guy called Dave Everts, who now works with British Swimming, and a guy called Rob Greenwood, who later went on to be the head coach at the British Paralympic team in 2016. So some really great coaches. I didn't really do much more than get to sort of a national level. So I was okay, but certainly nothing beyond that in terms of international level or anything like that.
And so this was I don't want to like force you to reveal your age, but you have a 1-year-old, so people can kind of do the math. This was roughly early 2000s. Is that sort of the era we're talking about?
Yeah, early 2000s. So I'm early 30s now, so yeah, it'll be early 2000s.
You're not a late 30s like me. Yeah, you're just a young person. Okay, so at what point you finish your swimming career at 19? At that point, what is your professional ambition? Like, what are you thinking about doing for your life?
So at that point, all I had ever done was swim, and I think like most swimmers, it was such a, it was every single day pretty much, and swimming was in the blood, and I could only really see myself in coaching, and I actually got the opportunity straight away. I was very fortunate to actually start coaching with Gallica and the group that I was actually swimming with. I actually got invited by Rob, who was the head coach at the time, and he said, "Look, do you want to do a little bit of coaching with us?" There was me and my best mate still, who still keeping in contact with, called Andy, and we basically started coaching straight out of the pool, and we were pretty much on deck with the swimmers that we were actually training with the previous season. And it was a massive eye opener. It was a really, really quick learning curve. And we got the opportunity to work with those guys. We also got the opportunity to work with some of the age group squads as well. And there were some really, really good swimmers in these groups. Swimmers that went on to represent GB at the Olympics, and certainly at World Championship level as well. And it was.
Can you tell me a little bit, like what were some of the? You said it was a big eye opener, and it's kind of unusual to transition directly from training with a bunch of people, and then like all of a sudden next season, you're their coach. What kind of things just sort of smacked you across the forehead the second you started coaching?
I think the hardest thing was going from having a laugh with those guys and then being. Some of them were really, really close mates that you hung around with, to then telling them or giving them advice and trying to sort of be that coaching figure on poolside. And that side of things was very challenging, but it was a really good learning curve in the fact that Rob, who was the head coach, there was a guy called John, and later a coach called Louise Graham, who had come from Leeds. And all of them had incredibly high standards. So as a young coach at sort of 17, 18, well, more 18, 19, 20, we had incredibly high standards, and we were expected to follow them just the way that they were coaching. Even though we weren't getting paid at the time, it was all voluntary, and we were doing 6-7 sessions a week. Certainly for the first couple of years, all voluntary work. But it was very, very good grounding. And I got the opportunity at the same time. So while I was coaching there, I was also head coach of a program called Blackburn. So at 19, I was coaching some unbelievable swimmers, but I was also head coach of a relatively small program in the north of England called Blackburn. And it was like learning on the job at that point, and doing two sort of completely different roles. Which again, it was just a great experience, and it was a great grounding. And I think sort of them first 3 or 4 years of my coaching career have helped set up a lot of the values that perhaps I have now.
And was that like you said, you're head coaching a little club? Was that common that like a 19-year-old would take over a little swim club? Because I know, like in my own experience in Denmark, we had quite a few, maybe not 19-year-olds, but we had a lot of young coaches. I mean, we had kids, like for instance, in the club that I coached, that would transition out of competing at 15 or 16 years old and go straight into the learn to swim, or sort of low competitive coaching part of our team. And then they would make their way up into the higher competitive part pretty quickly by, those sort of late teens, early 20s part. Was that common?
I don't think it was very common, no. And, it was very good in some ways. And I was only there for a year and a half, so I wasn't doing it for too long, because I actually, after that point, I moved on to Dubai. But I wouldn't say it was particularly common. I think most coaches will do their time as assistant coaches and age group coaches first before sort of making that step up. And I know certainly my last 5 years at Hackney have been completely different in terms of being a head coach compared to that year and a half that I was head coach in Blackburn. But I think because I had that opportunity of working with Gallica, and I was assisting there with some great coaches and great swimmers, it gave me that first of all, confidence as a young coach, but also it gave me that that sort of opportunity to sort of fall back and ask the questions. And if there wasn't things that I was sure on, then I'd go back and I could ask those questions. So yeah, I mean, it was certainly not common, I don't think, but it was an opportunity, and I wanted to take that opportunity.
And you said there were like 3 or 4 sort of core values that really got into your foundation during that time? What were those values?
I think hard work and consistent hard work as a coach, and making sure that everything that you do, you're doing it to become better, as a better program and help your swimmers. I think having high standards of yourself and of the swimmers and of those people around you, and that's certainly something I've taken all the way through my coaching career. And I think perhaps something that we'll allude to a little bit later on is just that having that sort of high standard in technique and skills, and making sure that the swimmers are constantly applying it. It's something that we did a lot of at Gallica, and the swimmers worked incredibly hard, and there was some really, really good, hard-working swimmers, but the basis of everything came down to, right, are they doing it with the right technique and the right skills? And that's something that's stuck with me, all the way through my coaching career so far.
Yeah, and I'm also, just sort of putting some dates on it. I'm thinking that you started coaching towards the end of the Bill Sweetenham era, if you could call it, there in Britain. I wonder, like, as a young coach, could you? It from the outside looking in, it seems like there was a lot changing in British swimming at that time. How did you experience sort of all the change that was taking place? Or you could challenge the premise and say, things didn't really change that much.
Yeah, it's funny. We were actually talking about this a week or so ago with a group of coaches who, I think I was sort of on that time where I'd sort of missed the wave of coaching with Sweetenham. I'd seen the changes and I'd seen some really great things that he'd brought in. But I wasn't really part of that setup. And, I was actually chatting to some of my old coaches, and also a coach called Russ Barber, who's running the Swim Coach Network at the moment. And they had a real big influence in, or Sweetenham had a real big influence in their careers. And again, I think the standards of, what was set during that time has really helped catapult British swimming, certainly in these last few years. So I don't know an awful lot about it, but I know that the coaches that were coaching at that time have a lot of respect and have certainly appreciated the work that he did.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think of him as you're talking about this value of like setting a really high standard. And I don't pretend to speak for Sweetenham, but I've read a lot of Sweetenham, and I would guess that that's sort of like one of his core values and one of the biggest things he emphasized over and over again when he was in charge of British swimming, that, we really need to raise the standard. And it'll kind of be a factor in our lightning round. You may not be familiar with this podcast, but at the end I do a little quiz, and we'll talk about a certain swimmer that locked horns with Bill Sweetenham over his high standards, particularly for making international teams. So, so you start this coaching career. You're coaching a little club. You're volunteering in Gallica. How you went to? You referenced coaching in Dubai. Did you go to Dubai and then come back? Give me the sort of the brief timeline of you leaving Gallica, getting to Dubai, and then coming back to the UK.
Yeah, so it was 2010. So I was still coaching at Gallica and Blackburn, and the funding was going to get cut from Gallica, from the performance program. And the head coach at the time, Louise Graham, who she's been a fantastic mentor over the years. She basically said, look, you've got an opportunity now to go and establish yourself as a coach and perhaps go and do something a little bit different. And she pointed me in the direction of this job opportunity that had come up in Dubai. It's a program called Hamilton Aquatics. And yeah, 2010, I went for the interview and I got the job, and I was there for 5 years, and it was a really, really great time in my life. My wife came out with me as well, and we had a really enjoyable time out there, and we learned a lot and met some great people and great friends, and Dubai, if anyone's ever been there, it's a phenomenal place. It's a city in the middle of the desert. I'd never heard of it before. I'd never even sort of knew where it was before I actually went there. And it completely shocked me because sort of the lifestyle was great. We worked incredibly hard and we did a lot out there. And the program Hamilton, which some people may have come across before. I know they're sending a lot of swimmers over to the US, certainly into the college programs. It's a fantastic program. It's huge. They've got a massive Learn to Swim. It's probably one of the most established, if not the most established club in Dubai. There's only a few others that have been there around about the same sort of length of time as Hamilton. And yeah, some amazing times and some great people and great swimmers there.
So you spent 5 years coaching in that area, and you're right. I mean, I think you and I even had a previous conversation. I think I recruited somebody out of Dubai in that same time frame, and actually my Danish cousin was living there during that same time period, and up until I want to say probably a couple of years ago, was living there. It tells us a very similar story about life there, and I can guess. Part of the context of this, right, is that there's a even for Danish people, there was a significant Danish expat community around. There's all these like little sort of pockets. So yes, you're living in a foreign country, but you also can interact with a lot of people that are also sort of in the same situation as you. Did you have a similar experience living there?
Yeah, absolutely. It was pretty much everyone there were expats. There was I think the Emiratis only equate to about 10% of the population. So yeah. 90% of the people there are expats, and from all over the world as well. So it's a lot of Europeans and a lot of Brits, but there was also a lot of Australians, people from New Zealand, from the States. From India, from East Asia. It was from everywhere. And the culture was just such a nice, friendly culture, because everyone was in the same boat. Everyone was in a foreign country together, enjoying it and trying to make the most out of it. And everyone was very happy and very friendly out there.
Yeah. So what made you make the decision ultimately to return to the UK?
So I think it was ambition more than anything. So we'd had some great times, and at the time I was assistant head coach and head development coach. The head coach Ash Morris done a fantastic job developing swimmers out there, and what I really liked about it was that the swimmers that we were developing at sort of, certainly at an age group level at 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, a lot of those swimmers are now still swimming, and they're still swimming at a really good level. And like I say, some of them have gone on to the States and are now competing and training at some fantastic universities there. Some have gone back to Britain or the places in the world. And so many of them are still training and still competing at such a great level. But because I wasn't head coach, I sort of had that taste when I was at Blackburn. I kind of wanted to get back to the UK and sort of continue my coaching journey. We actually sort of at the time, so I handed my notice in, and there was no job available. There was nothing that had stood out. Me and my wife had just decided, right, let's make that step. And then sort of the next opportunity came up at Hackney Aquatics, and I applied for it, and again I got the job. But that was sort of a period of a couple of months of not actually knowing what I was going to go back to. But yeah, it was sort of 2015. And we moved back over to the UK, so we went to London, which again completely different from where I was in the north of England.
Right.
And Hackney Aquatics at the time, it was a program that nobody had ever heard of. It's a program that certainly anywhere outside of London hadn't really heard of it. So it was incredibly small, and sort of I think in previous years they'd always sort of they got by and they'd done an okay job in London, but sort of nothing beyond that. And
sorry, in the context of an English swim club, like what's a small swim club? Because one of the things nerdy questions we ask on this podcast is like, Denmark, a big swim club. has 250 competitive swimmers. In America, that's like a small-ish swim club. Small, maybe some people would consider it medium size. So what's a small swim club when you say Hackney was small? And then you keep going.
So in terms of full membership, when I joined it, I had 150 swimmers, but that included quite a big master's program, quite a big non-competitive program. Yeah. But I'd just come from Hamilton, where we built the program, and there was 650 competitive swimmers and about 2,000, 3,000 learned to swim under that as well. So it was quite a contrast in terms of the size from what I had in Dubai.
Yeah. So go on. Just talk about developing that club as you were there early and the reputation of it. But what changed?
Yeah. So it was an opportunity that I was thinking, right, I perhaps see myself here a couple of years and sort of get established back in the UK. But what I found was that I had an incredibly supportive committee who allowed me to put together a plan and a vision, and basically allowed me to sort of run with it. And, you know, they were always there sort of supporting and guiding, and some fantastic people who were, you know, very high up in their careers and their jobs, but was just allowing sort of a young 20, I think I was 26, 27 at the time, sort of take on the role of head coach and just go with it. And the program was, when I first joined, and I didn't realize this when I actually joined it was actually losing a lot of money. So they were actually losing around about £30,000 a year at the time, which was a huge amount of money. You know, you're like, the club would have gone bust in the space of a year or so. Yeah. And I had to find a way. I mean, I was certainly ambitious, and I certainly wanted to do, you know, well with the swimmers that we had. And I had to find a way of growing this program with really limited resources. So hardly, you know, in terms of actually putting any money into it, but also grow it and try and be successful out of it, as well as plugging that gap of £30,000. And I think what Hamilton was very good at in Dubai, it was very good at sort of being run as a business. And the owner, Chris Tidy, fantastic businessman, and has done an amazing job at developing the program as a whole. And then Ash, the head coach, sort of from the swimming side of it, you know, he was very good at making sure that they were doing the right things. And I think because of sort of that experience, it allowed me to think, right, well, you know, we've got to operate as a business, but we've also got to operate, you know, with the same sort of core values that I've always had. And we plugged the gap, and I just found ways to try and do things differently and innovatively. So a lot of the things that we brought on were very cheap, or they were free. So we brought on like Pilates teachers and yoga teachers to help with the dry land, who offered their services for free. Every time that I got told that I couldn't have something, I found another way to do it. So if we couldn't have more pool time, then I found a way of finding that pool time somewhere. If we couldn't have land training space, then I'd find the tiniest bit of space on the balcony, and we'd find a little area to do pre-pool there. Or, you know, if we couldn't get extra pool time, we couldn't run a learn to swim. But I always found little ways to do it. And I think it was just like, right, if we're going to get knocked back 3 or 4 times, I'll always come back and find a way to do it differently. And eventually I got a decent amount of pool time there, and a decent amount of resources, and with the help of some fantastic people who volunteered their time or gave up their time for relatively cheap. And with it, we grew significantly. Like, we went from 150 swimmers in year one. I think when I left last year, it was about 450, close to 500 swimmers. So, you know, it was a decent jump in 5 years.
I wouldn't say that's a decent jump. I think you're underselling it. That's a massive jump.
Yeah. And I think for me, sort of that's been my sort of proudest moment in my coaching career, because of how little we had to sort of what we grew and developed. And yeah, I think most people now have started to hear about Hackney Aquatics, certainly in England, perhaps not the rest of the world yet, but they're starting to make a bit of a name for themselves.
People, important question here. People in the U.S. probably, you know, we tend to think all people with received pronunciation sound the same. But were you teased for your North England accent in the London area?
Yeah, I certainly had a few comments. I think because I've been in Dubai as well, I picked up a little bit of an Australian twang, and I don't know why I do it, but sometimes I pronounce a few of my words with a slight Australian twang. So I got a few little digs for that.
Okay. Um, so as you referenced, you and I introduced you off the top, you're the former head coach. So you're there for 5 years. And I think actually something that's really admirable is that you've spent enough time, like coaching by necessity. Sometimes if you're ambitious, you've got to move around a bit. But it seems like listening to your story, even for a young coach, like you got pretty committed into the projects you were working on and spent enough time at a place where you felt like, okay, we really accomplished something before moving on. What factored into your decision to move on from Hackney and pursue something else?
Yeah, so I think the goal was always to move closer to family back up in the north of England, and we'd lived five years in London. London's not an easy place to live. It's an incredibly big city. I'm sure most of you are aware, and to actually get from one end to the other can take a couple of hours just to do it. And often sat on public transport and sat in traffic jams constantly, and it sort of got to that point where at 5 years I wanted to move on, and I was the 45 to an hour commute every day. It's probably nothing compared to what some coaches do, but it was pretty difficult when we just had a baby, and we wanted to move on, and the goal was always to move back up north, closer to family. But I got a call. It was actually this time last year, so I think it was January 2020, and I got a call from a friend that I have in New Zealand, and he said that there's an opportunity coming up at a program. I already knew he'd been working with the region at the time, a guy called Darren Ward, and he said there's an opportunity coming up. They're really keen on you. They've seen what you've done at Hackney. Would you be interested in going for the job? And at the time, I was like, right, the goal was to try and get closer to family and friends rather than get further away.
As far away as possible.
Like literally the other side of the world.
Yeah.
And my wife, she was like, look, this is an amazing opportunity in an amazing country. I think we should go for it. And it was probably about this time last year. I'd just come back from a training camp in Dubai, actually, with Swim England, and we sort of we went for it and just said, yeah, let's go for it. And I got offered the opportunity to move to New Zealand at a program called St. Peter's, which is in sort of the centre of the North Island in New Zealand. And yeah, I was meant to be there in June 2020, and I'm still here in the UK in February 21.
Yeah, you're kind of caught in limbo. I mean, for anyone who has not been, I think everybody's aware of that there's a pandemic going on, but maybe not the specifics of international travel. It's been nearly impossible to enter New Zealand basically since the beginning of the pandemic. And good for people that are living in New Zealand because they've not had to put up with probably a lot of the restrictions that many of the rest of us have in the rest of the world because of that sort of ability to restrict movement into the country. They haven't had any kind of like real massive outbreak of COVID, but for people like yourself, it's meant, like nearly a year of limbo, just sort of waiting. And what's that been like?
It's had its ups and downs. So we basically moved house. We packed up everything, and everything went into a shipping container in at the end of June last year.
Oh my!
We were expecting to move out straight away, and then everything just got delayed, and it was sort of waiting a month, and we were basically waiting for the borders to open. So, they've done an amazing job, don't get me wrong, at keeping COVID at bay, but it's been incredibly frustrating trying to actually get into the country. And, maybe it's the right thing for them to do. And, we just have to be patient now. And we moved back in with parents, which has been great for the little one and babysitting. But the problem is England have been in and out of lockdowns ever since, so there hasn't been any opportunities to really do any physical coaching and on-deck coaching since. Yeah. So I spent quite a lot of time working on the laptop and doing Zoom calls.
Yeah, so I have to ask too, just since you considered, or you took this job in New Zealand, was The Lord of the Rings like a big motivating factor in that, the movies?
So I like Lord of the Rings, but I'm not a massive fan. But I love the scenery and where we're going in New Zealand is where the Hobbit was filmed. So the Shire, the little Hobbit houses. So that's only 5 minutes away from where we're going. So I know my sister is a huge new Lord of the Rings fan, and she's planning her honeymoon to do a little bit of a trek around New Zealand.
She's going to the Shire for who's your favorite character in the Lord of the Rings?
Oh, wow.
You weren't expecting to answer this.
No, I probably don't know enough about Lord of the Rings to answer that. I'm going to go Frodo, because that's probably the only character I know.
Oh, okay.
My sister could name every character.
Yeah. I mean, just for the books, for sure it was Gandalf, but in the movie, Aragorn, 100%. Anyway, back to coaching. So you, as you said, you've had some time working at home, and you referenced this a little bit earlier, that sort of one of your foundational values was the skill acquisition, teaching. And you and I had a chance to talk for like 2 hours, and just really fascinated with some of the stuff that you've been up to. So talk about, I think there's like two questions that make me really curious here, because I can see that the stuff you were presenting, which was all about different sort of styles of swimming, the 4 strokes of swimming, that a lot of it came from coaching, but it's the kind of project that nobody has time for when they're on deck maybe twice a day, every day, to be able to sort of like put all of it down on the page. What motivated you to do that?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's, for 5 years, it had been pretty much non-stop coaching and working at developing the club, and probably not enough time on actually developing myself as a coach. And I'm the sort of person that, you ask my wife, that if I'm sat there doing nothing, I get very, very agitated. So I wanted to use the opportunity while I had it to actually develop my sort of learning and coaching, and actually spend time watching videos and reading books and reading articles. And what's been, I think, probably the biggest revelation through lockdowns is the Zoom calls that we've had with coaches. They've been amazing, especially here in the UK. I don't know what it's been like in the States, but we've had some amazing Zoom calls with coaches, and just the opportunity to chat and ask questions to coaches that you would never have that opportunity to do normally. And it sort of got me thinking, and the first part of it was a lot of the coaches were talking about their values and about what they believe in and their coaching philosophies. And I started with that, and I started with, well, it's been a long time since I actually wrote down my coaching philosophy and what I actually the reason why I actually coach. And I actually put it together as a sort of a bit of a PowerPoint and just started with that. And sort of the thing that stood out was the technical side of coaching and developing technique and developing skills. And sort of the next sort of project from that was, well, it's been quite a long time since I've really looked at the strokes and really thought, what do the biomechanics look like, and how are the strokes put together, and how do they evolve across the different events and different distances. I started off with a little bit of a project. I'd seen a few coaches have done sort of similar, smaller versions of this, and I wanted to put something together that basically put all the details of the different styles and the different strokes together and looked at them in a little bit more depth with videos and with pictures. And then from there, sort of, I put that together, and then sort of, I wanted to think about how we actually get to that point. So obviously you don't start coaching, different styles and different strokes or different racing strokes straight away with your junior swimmers and your age group swimmers. There's a process about actually getting to that. So I started researching into how we actually periodize technique and how we develop it and how it actually becomes autonomous and how it becomes ingrained with the athletes. And sort of I put together another little side project and how we actually develop that. And then sort of the latest one I'm doing now is just looking at how we develop our sort of training strokes and how we, what we're actually doing within the training pool in terms of our stroke and our skills and our technique and how we actually put that together properly. So there's been 3 parts to it. And again, I've had some great chats with coaches like yourself, and got a lot of ideas from various people and various sources. But yeah, it's just been fun just putting all that together and spending a bit of time watching swimming.
Yeah. You and I had a great time nerding out over some videos. We share love for watching Federica Pellegrini swim the 200 free. And I particularly, like, after I'd finished talking to you, and, so part of anytime I do something like this, I do a podcast or I spend 2 hours on 2 hours on Zoom with somebody I just met from England. I have to justify the expenditure of time to my boss, because I am actually at work right now. And so he asked me later, and he'll listen to this podcast, so he's familiar with this conversation. He asked me later, what are some big takeaways? I'm curious to hear, like, 30,000 foot view, what some of the big sort of themes that came across for you as you were doing this work. But the number one thing that stuck with me afterwards was, I thought you had a really good model for, like, I can never say this word properly, pedagogical, is it?
Pedagogy, yeah.
Really good description of the pedagogy of teaching skills and teaching strokes. And I think that is something, like, it's one thing. I think there's a lot of people out there who can be really descriptive about what competitive swimming strokes should look like, or different styles of competitive strokes. But there is, I think, writ large in coaching, like, a really great need for more idea exchange around how it is we're actually teaching that and giving us frameworks around. And I thought you had a really good framework around that. What were some of, like, 30,000 foot view? What were some of the other sort of big insights you got working on this project?
Yeah, I think the pedagogy stuff, so basically the way that we coach and the way that we teach, that again came from a little bit of my philosophy that I started off with, and I wanted to sort of look at how we actually get to that end product. And we obviously periodize our physiology. We started talking about how we periodize psychology, but we haven't seen it very often, how we actually periodize technique. And if you think about, if you wanted to change a swimmer's stroke, perhaps you've picked something up, and they basically have to relearn a new skill or a new technique. Or how do we get to that point of them starting off learning it to them being autonomous and actually understanding and doing it without thinking in a pressure situation in a race? It's not just, doing a few drills and then, right, let's hope for the best, off you go. There is actually a process, and there's been a little bit of research in team sports on how they develop components of their team sports. To say with soccer or football, the goalkeeping aspect, if they're learning a new skill, they start off with perhaps the cognitive stage, which is about learning the skill, breaking it down, developing it, looking at it in small components. And that's what we do a lot of in swimming. We break the skill down, we put it back together, we do drills, we show videos, we do all of that. And that's the sort of the cognitive stage of learning, where they're learning how to do that thing. But then it's about how we actually retain it. And so the next stage is the what I was going to say.
You're gonna pull up your notes, so you can go ahead.
Lost my train of thought. Sorry, the associative stage. So the associative stage is where you're putting it together. You're putting it under a little bit of pressure. So you might be doing perhaps more contrast training, which is sort of that going from perhaps adding a little bit more resistance to the stroke, taxing the sort of the brain to be able to do it under a slightly different pressure or scenario, putting more equipment on them, or perhaps getting them to do it at varying speeds or changing speeds. So you're basically putting it together. And I think we spend quite a lot of time in that cognitive stage. We don't often spend much time in this associative stage, where we're really learning and sort of we're aligning those synapses and making sure that they're forming and making sure that we're actually able to then, when we get to the pressure situation, whether it's a race or whether it's a major meet or whatever it is, that we're actually then able to do this skill, this thing in a competition. And that's where you get the autonomous stage, where you're able to do it. And it's not just, you do your cognitive stage, you do your associative stage, and you do the autonomous stage. It's a continuous circle of learning. It's not just, right, we've gone from one to the next and then that's it. It's about going back to the cognitive stage, breaking it down again, and then spending more time in that associative stage, and then spending time in that autonomous stage. And that autonomous stage, you can do, obviously you've got your meet scenarios, but you can do your pressure training. And it's about understanding as well where the swimmer is within that continuum and that cycle. So there's no point in trying to get a swimmer who you've just started with the basics of learning a new skill or technique in that cognitive stage, and then asking them to step up and do it in a race situation, and they've got no idea how to actually apply it properly. It's about adding all of the components together. So it's, I'm sure it's something that a lot of coaches already do, but I just wanted to put a little bit of a model together to sort of show how it actually works.
Yeah, you're reminding me of one of my pet peeves in coaching, which is, I've been on deck with coaches where they've got the swimmers, they're competing in a race. The swimmer makes a technical error during the race, and the coach kind of turns around and goes, I told them not to do that. And I'm thinking like, okay, but they've not learned it. They've not learned it so that it's, as you say, like automatic, that they don't have autonomy over the skill so that it happens automatically. Skill acquisition, like listening to your whole model. I mean, it's, skill acquisition is not just a matter of correcting somebody's error one time or two times. Actually, probably you'll see this too as your kid gets older and you try to teach them any number of things. Even really, really little kids who are like learning sponges, who are, the fastest, in some ways, the fastest acquirers of new skills in the world, will need a lot of repetition on things in order to get it to be, get autonomy over a new skill. Like I always tell people the story of teaching my kids to say please and thank you. I thought it would be a matter of sort of reinforcing that like 100 times. Turns out it's many thousands of times that we sort of need to get repetitions on before it happens automatically. And I think you're right that I see a really heavy emphasis in a lot of corners on technique work that's done at a slow sort of low pressure environment, where like, okay, we're trying to acquire something new and we know just sort of like instinctually as coaches, hey, it's got to be, we can't just go full force for it. We've got to take our time to introduce this new thing. And then I know a lot of people who are into race-paced training who go, well, if you're not doing it full bore, it's not applicable to a race situation. And I think the truth is probably, as you put it, that there's space for, sort of low end skill acquisition. There's a transitional piece that takes it into really, really high pressure situations. And there's a certain number of repetitions in high pressure before it becomes automatic. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And how you do each of those stages is entirely up to the coach and the swimmer. Is the cognitive stage. It's not just about doing drills. It could be watching the videos and giving feedback on that, and then asking them to go back and work on a certain aspect, but breaking down the smaller components of it. And that associative stage, it's not perhaps just about doing repetitions. It's about taxing the system to be able to do it in under pressure or in different ways. Like adding a little bit of resistance to the training, putting a bungee on or adding a parachute on, or adding various bits of equipment. And then the autonomous stage. There's so many different ways that you can do it. It could be that we're just doing it in competitions and building it up. The other thing to consider as well, and another part of the model is about what are the actual limitations of trying to change someone's stroke. It could be that when you're going back to, the first thing is if you're trying to change someone's stroke, it's not just about asking them to do it a certain way. You've got to look at everything else that's underneath that. So what's their physical limitations like? Is the reason they can't do their stroke because of their mobility in their shoulders, or because they can't extend a certain way, or whatever. So look at what their physical limitations are, probably more than anything, before you do any of the sort of changes to the stroke or changes to the drills. And then perhaps have a look at what their actual movement skills are like in water. How do they, say if we were looking at trying to change the stroke, are they able to do it in terms of, can they rotate properly, or can they balance properly in the water? Is by doing this change to the stroke, is it going to sort of send them off and their coordination go? Perhaps we need to work on their coordination before we start working on this part of the stroke. And then you can start breaking it down in terms of the drills and the strokes and stuff like that. And it's something, certainly when I was at Hamilton, it's certainly something that I was working on with some of the younger swimmers and the age group swimmers. I'd love to have the opportunity to really put this model into practice and get back into coaching and stuff. But it's certainly opened my eyes a little bit.
And I, just to, one of my projects in life is an anti-modesty project. So I'm going to push you a little bit. You've sort of like glossed over who you've presented this to by just saying like, oh, I had some nice Zoom calls. Talk about some of the audiences you've had so far for this presentation.
Yes, well, we started off, so it was more discussions and conversations with a little group of coaches that have here in England. So Rob Greenwood, who I mentioned before, who was the Paralympic head coach in 2016. A guy called Ian Wright in Glasgow, who's head coach at Glasgow, and a guy called Andy Addison, who's my best mate up in Scotland. And then from there, I put a few slides out there, and I did it with a few clubs. And I spoke to a guy called Dave Hemmings, who is at the ITC in Loughborough, and also Kev Renshaw as well, who both unbelievable coaches. And sort of from there, they gave me a few ideas, and we had, again, similar to what we did with you, Chris. It was like a 2-hour chat of just talking about this model and the coaching, and it was just great. They'd seen it on Twitter and wanted to.
That's how I found you too. I saw that.
Yeah, and speaking, it was so it was great because I'd never really spoken to certainly Dave before, other than a visit to Loughborough last year, and just to pick the brains and speak to them and sort of to reinforce some of the ideas was fantastic. And then from there, we did a session with the British Swimming Coaches Association. Swim England and Swim Scotland have done it recently. And then I've got Swim Ireland and Swim Scotland are doing a follow-up presentation next week as well.
Oh, nice. So it's, I hope that you get a chance. I know you're probably enjoying this stuff, but I can hear in your voice that, you're ready also to get off Zoom and, be on the pool deck. And I hope that you're able to put some of this stuff into practice on a team that you're coaching soon. All right, we're going to get to the lightning round. In the lightning round, I like to torture people that come on my podcast with trivia questions. I come up with a unique set of trivia questions for each guest. In your case, I am, all these questions are about British swimming in the time period when you yourself were an athlete, and then in early part of your coaching career. And there's a little, the last one, well, the second to last one, sorry, you might have to go a little farther back in history. But other than that, we're gonna test your knowledge, Rick.
This is so my memory since having a baby has been terrible. So we'll see how this goes.
No. Would you let your swimmers make an excuse like that, Rick? Come on.
Yeah,
let's get your head in the game.
Good
We're going to hold you to a high standard here. All right. Question number 1. In 2004, Great Britain managed just 2 bronze medals in the Olympics. I like how I wrote that. I'm reading my own question like, that's kind of harsh, Chris. It's, winning a bronze medal is pretty impressive. But anyway, can you name one of the 2 medalists and bonus points for the event?
Ooh, I am going to say David Davis.
That's correct.
In the 1500.
That's correct. Do you want to know who the other one was?
Go on then.
Stephen Perry in the 200 butterfly. Yeah. 155, like 5. Pretty good.
I should really know that as well. I did.
Okay. Now, earlier I referenced a swimmer that had butted heads with Sweetenham. So this question will be about him, although not about that conflict. Mm-hmm. Mark Foster won 14. I was amazed to find this out in my research. He won 14 50-meter free short course meters titles in Britain. Can you name the first or last year he won?
Ooh. Do you know what? So Mark Foster actually came out to Dubai and we did a clinic. That was back in 2010. So I think he'd just finished swimming then. So I'm going to say 2008 or 9. He finished.
So the last one was in 2004.
Oh, maybe not then.
The first one was in 1986, Rick.
Wow.
Imagine being the best person in your country in the 50 free for an 18-year period.
Oh, it's phenomenal. Amazing swimmer.
Yeah, amazing career. In 2010, the Commonwealth Games were held in a major Indian city. Many British athletes complained of stomach discomfort during the competition. What term did journalists use to describe this?
That would be Delhi belly.
Delhi belly. Yeah, I couldn't use the name of the city in the question. It's too easy.
Yeah.
Too much of a giveaway. I have no idea how hard that question is. Maybe that's really easy if you were living in England at the time. You were reading many headlines about Delhi belly. Okay. The last 2, we get into the really hard stuff.
Yep.
Adam Peaty is the dominant breaststroker of his age, no question.
Yep.
But Britain has had a great tradition of Olympic breaststroke medalists. Can you name 3 other British medalists from the post-modern era, sort of the post-World War II era?
I'm going to say Michael Jameson.
Correct.
Duncan Goodhue. Am I wrong with that?
I don't know. I might be wrong. The research is not ironclad. So
he was a little bit before my time. I'm going to say David Wilkie.
that's correct.
And go on, give me a clue on.
Do you know what? I just looked it up off screen on my phone. You were right about Duncan Goodhue, and the reason why I missed it is because I'm a biased American, and I didn't look at the 1980 Olympics because we boycotted, and that's when he won.
It didn't happen in America, did it?
Yeah. As far as we were concerned over here, the 1980 Olympics didn't happen. So, but you're absolutely right. So you did get three there. You've got Jameson, Wilkie, Goodhue. I would have accepted Nick Gillingham.
Yep.
And I found a couple of women that were like closer to World War II, 1950s, 60s. Anita Lonsborough.
Oh yeah. And
Helen Gordon.
Okay.
All right. Now we're getting to the final hardest question. And you might find this question to be a little bit unfair, but it's just a Phil must ask it anyway. What is up with Craig Lord? What's his deal? Craig Lord.
What is up with him?
Yeah. What's his deal? I've had him on this podcast, but I still don't know what his deal is. So, as somebody from the British Isles, just like let us know what's the deal with Craig Lord?
Well, I don't know an awful lot about him other than the Swim Vortex years and the articles. And I was a fan of Swim Vortex certainly at the start. I think it probably went a little bit too political. So I don't. Other than that, I don't really know much about him and the sort of the other stuff that he does. So I am quite sorry to disappoint with that.
I'm gonna title this podcast "Rick Hall Refuses to Tell Us."
doing the political answer there.
Refuses to. Anybody listening, Craig Lord, wonderful human being. If you meet him in real life, he's not the ranting and raving person you might perceive from reading one of his 10,000 word editorials about this or that or the other thing. I had the chance to bring him on this podcast. I had a really good time talking to him. So that question was just meant to tease you a bit.
One thing I would say with that, I do miss sort of the swim vortex. I know we've got quite a few swimming websites out there, but I actually really enjoyed reading, perhaps not the 10,000 word ranting essays, but I certainly enjoyed reading some of the articles on that back in the day.
Yeah, I think Craig, if you're listening out there, I miss that too. I know he's doing stuff for Swimming World magazine here in the U.S. now, but it just doesn't. It's like New Coke, like here in the 1980s in the U.S. they tried to change the formula to Coke, and it was widely rejected. I find Swimming World Craig Lord to be like New Coke. I want the classic. I want the classic to make a comeback. It's just not the same. Rick, it's been great talking to you. Thank you for making some time to share all of that with me, and I wish you luck. I hope you get a chance to, as I said, put some of this in practice on a pool deck soon.
Yeah, no worries, and thank you for the opportunity.